It was just another quiet afternoon when everything spiraled out of control. I had just returned home from a long day at work, and the only thing I was looking forward to was a few peaceful hours spent with my dog, Charlie. He was a big, goofy lab mix, with more energy than a toddler on sugar. I opened the front door, greeted him with a scratch behind the ears, and let him out into the yard. The neighborhood was calm, the streets empty as usual, but little did I know that just a few minutes later, my life would be turned upside down. It all started with a knock on the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. It was an odd hour for a visit, and when I opened it, there stood Karen, my neighbor from 2 doors down, her face flushed with anger. She looked like someone who had just lost a battle and was preparing to fight another one. The first thing she said caught me off guard: "Your dog bit me." Now, I knew Charlie. He wasn't a mean bone in his body. He'd never bitten anyone in his life, and certainly not Karen, who always seemed to have an issue with everyone. But there she stood, her hand clutching her arm like it had been torn apart. There wasn't a mark on her skin. The absurdity of it hit me immediately. I knew something was off, but I didn't have any proof. Or so I thought. "Are you sure about that?" I asked, trying to keep my voice even, though I could feel a knot forming in my stomach. "Charlie's never been aggressive, Karen. Maybe you're mistaken." Her eyes narrowed, and I noticed the sharp edge in her voice as she responded. "No, I'm not mistaken. Your dog attacked me. You need to do something about it." "I'm going to the police," she spat, her words like venom. At that moment, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. This wasn't just a casual complaint. This was serious. I could feel my heart rate increase. I wanted to call her bluff, but she looked so sure of herself. I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to tell her to get off my property and stop making baseless accusations, but something about her demeanor made me hesitate. So, I did the only thing I could think of: I told her to go ahead and report it to the authorities. I didn't know it then, but that one sentence would become the catalyst for everything that was about to unfold. She turned and stormed off, muttering threats under her breath, her footsteps fading into the distance. I stood there, heart pounding, wondering if I had just made a huge mistake. Was she lying? Could she be trying to ruin Charlie's reputation? It was all too much to process in that moment, but I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't going to be the last I heard of it. The next morning, things got worse. As I stepped outside to take Charlie for his morning walk, I noticed something odd. A small crowd had gathered at the edge of my yard. I hadn't seen these neighbors in weeks, and now they were all staring at my house with an unsettling curiosity. I couldn't help but wonder. Had Karen already started spreading her story? Before I could ask, Karen appeared at the edge of the group, her face plastered with an expression of victory. "You should know, I've already contacted animal control," she said with a smug smile, as if she'd just won some grand battle. "I'm filing a formal complaint. They'll be here soon. You'll see." Panic surged through me. How had things escalated this quickly? I hadn't even been given the chance to defend myself, let alone explain the situation. There was no physical evidence of a bite. There was no sign of injury on Karen, but she was playing her part well. She'd convinced the neighborhood that Charlie was a dangerous animal, and I was his negligent owner. It felt like the walls were closing in. But then, something caught my eye. I had an old security camera on my porch, one I'd installed months ago just as a precaution. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. It was just for general safety. But now, I realized that it might be the one thing that could prove Karen was lying. The camera might have caught the entire interaction, the one where she claimed my dog attacked her. I hurried back inside, heart racing, and pulled up the footage on my laptop. As I watched the video, my fingers trembled on the keyboard. I was hoping, praying that the footage would show the truth, that Karen was making up this entire story. What I saw next shocked me. There she was, on video, walking up to my house. Charlie was wagging his tail as she approached, and I could see her smile, pretending to be friendly. But then, in an instant, her demeanor shifted. She stepped closer to him, and I saw her flinch as if she was preparing to make a move. Seconds later, she dropped to the ground, clutching her arm and yelling in pain. I couldn't believe my eyes. This wasn't a bite. This wasn't even an attack. It was an act. Karen had staged the whole thing. I knew what I had to do now. This video was my proof. And Karen had no idea what was coming next. The next morning, after spending hours rewatching the footage, I knew I had to act quickly. The video didn't lie, Karen had orchestrated the whole thing. But there was a bigger problem now, the damage had already been done. The whole neighborhood seemed to be whispering about it, and I couldn't shake the feeling that people were looking at me differently. When I stepped outside, I noticed a few curious glances, people watching from behind their windows or peeking from behind their hedges. It felt like I was under some kind of scrutiny. I wasn't just a guy with a dog anymore. I was the neighbor whose dog supposedly bit someone, even though I knew the truth. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my friend Rachel, someone who'd lived next to me for years and who I thought would understand. "Hey, are you okay? People are talking. Karen's telling everyone your dog bit her." I didn't respond right away. What could I say? What could I do? I was beyond angry, beyond frustrated, but most of all, I was scared. The video might prove Karen was lying, but I needed more than just proof. I needed to make sure this didn't spiral out of control. As the day passed, the anxiety grew. Karen's story was spreading faster than I could keep up with. I could hear snippets of conversations as I passed my neighbors, and their looks were full of judgment, even though they hadn't heard my side of the story. It felt like I was a criminal in their eyes, and I wasn't sure how much longer I could stand it. I knew that if I didn't do something soon, this situation would spiral into a full-blown legal nightmare. But what could I do? I couldn't just confront Karen. She was already building her case, and I had nothing but a video. What would that prove in court? I needed to think strategically, but my mind raced in every direction, unable to focus. Then the knock came. It wasn't from Karen this time, but from the animal control officer. I didn't expect him this soon. He was a tall man with a firm grip, his badge gleaming in the sunlight. He introduced himself as Officer Bennett and explained that he was here to investigate the claim. As he stepped onto my porch, he didn't look like someone who was willing to listen to a story, he looked like someone who had already made up his mind. The tension in the air was thick. "I've heard reports of an incident involving your dog," he said without much emotion. "Karen has claimed that your dog attacked her, and I'm here to verify the facts." I felt my stomach churn. This was it. This was the moment I had to prove that everything she said was a lie. I took a deep breath, then calmly led him inside, showing him the footage I had saved from the security camera. He watched in silence, his face unreadable as the video played. I could feel the weight of his gaze on me, but I tried not to let it distract me. As the video played, I watched his expression shift. First, it was a slight furrow of the brow. Then, his lips tightened. By the time the video ended, he was looking at me with an entirely different expression. It wasn't disbelief, but something closer to skepticism, as if he was seeing something that didn't add up. He turned to me slowly, the tension between us palpable. "This footage doesn't match the story Karen's been telling," he admitted, his voice neutral. "But that doesn't mean we're done here. I'll need to follow up on this, but for now, I'll note that your dog doesn't appear to be at fault." He didn't offer an apology or an explanation for Karen's actions, but that small concession felt like a victory. As he left, I could finally breathe a little easier, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't going to let it go that easily, not without a fight. And sure enough, I didn't even have time to process the relief before the next round. As he left, I could finally breathe a little easier, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't going to let it go that easily, not without a fight. And sure enough, I didn't even have time to process the relief before the next round of drama began. Later that afternoon, I got a call from my lawyer, a calm voice on the other end. "I'm afraid this situation's escalating faster than I anticipated," he said, his tone professional but urgent. "Karen's lawyer has already contacted us. It seems she's moving forward with a formal lawsuit. I want to prepare you for the possibility of going to court." I froze. I had been hoping, praying, that this would blow over, that Karen would realize her plan wasn't working and back off. But it was clear now that she wasn't going to let go without a fight. I had proof. I had the video. But I also knew that a legal battle wasn't going to be simple. Even if the footage could exonerate me, the damage to my reputation and the toll it would take on my life could be devastating. I could already see the headlines in my head: man's dog accused of attacking neighbor, video reveals fraudulent claim. I could already hear the whispers, the judgment. I had to be ready. The next few weeks were a blur. The legal threats started piling up. Karen's lawyer sent letters, demands for compensation, and a series of aggressive notices. It felt like I was fighting a battle on all fronts: Karen, her lawyer, the neighborhood gossip mill, and the constant threat of a lawsuit hanging over my head. It was exhausting. But I wasn't about to let her win. I kept my head down, I kept my composure, and most importantly, I kept pushing back. I refused to be intimidated. I couldn't afford to let her ruin my life over a lie. I had Charlie to think about, too. He wasn't just my dog. He was my best friend, and I wasn't about to let anyone tarnish his reputation. Days turned into weeks, and it seemed like Karen's resolve only grew stronger. She started showing up at my house more frequently, making sure I knew that she was still watching, still waiting for me to slip up. But I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. I kept fighting. I kept pushing. And finally, the moment I had been waiting for arrived. It wasn't just a small victory, it was the endgame. I had something that would expose her for good. Something she couldn't deny. A final piece of evidence that would bury her lies once and for all. The pressure was mounting. Every day felt like I was waiting for the inevitable next move in this ridiculous game Karen had started. My lawyer had warned me that the next few steps would be crucial, and as I sat in my living room one evening, scanning over the stack of legal documents, I couldn't shake the feeling that the whole thing was spiraling out of control. I was holding on to a shred of hope, but Karen was relentless. She wasn't just dragging me through legal hoops, she was trying to ruin everything I'd worked for. The video was solid proof, but in her eyes, that didn't matter. She was determined to make sure that no one saw the truth, to paint me as a negligent pet owner and Charlie as some kind of dangerous beast. It felt like everything was against me, like I was caught in a game where the rules kept changing. Then, one day, things took a turn. I was out for a walk with Charlie when I spotted a familiar black car parked across the street. The same car I'd seen lurking around my property for the past few weeks. I didn't need to guess who it belonged to. It was one of Karen's allies. She had started to escalate things, enlisting others to keep an eye on me, to make sure I wasn't gathering more evidence, to intimidate me into submission. It was as if she was trying to make me feel paranoid, to make me question every little movement in my own neighborhood. But I wasn't going to let her succeed. I knew what she was up to. Charlie was tugging at the leash, oblivious to the tension in the air, but I couldn't shake the feeling of eyes on me. I turned the corner and walked past the car, trying to keep my composure. As I did, I caught a glimpse of the driver in the rearview mirror, his eyes darting nervously as he watched me pass. I didn't stop. I didn't even acknowledge him. But the encounter was a reminder of just how far Karen was willing to go to destroy my life. That night, my phone rang. It was Rachel again, but this time, her tone was different, urgent, almost frantic. "You won't believe this," she said before I could even say hello. "Karen's been telling everyone that she has new evidence. She's saying she's got footage that shows your dog attacking her." I was speechless. This was it. This was the lie she had been building up to. She was going to try to turn the tables, to twist the narrative in her favor. But how could she have footage? I thought back to the security camera footage I had of the incident. There was no way she could have known about it. She had to be making this up. But Rachel wasn't done. "Listen, I don't know the details, but I overheard her talking to some people at the grocery store today. She's claiming she's got this footage from another camera, one that shows you and Charlie in a totally different light. You need to do something." I couldn't let it slide. This was no longer just about Karen trying to get compensation or some petty revenge, it was about her trying to destroy my life with lies. I couldn't let her get away with it. It was time to take action. The following morning, I drove to the local police station to report what had been happening. I had the original video, the one that proved Karen's lies. But I needed more. I needed to make sure I wasn't just fighting a personal battle, I needed to make sure Karen's web of deceit wouldn't entangle me any further. I spoke with Officer Bennett again, and this time, he seemed more willing to listen. I told him everything, the harassment, the false accusations, and now, Karen's claim of new footage that could put me in a worse position. He assured me that they would look into it, but I couldn't afford to sit around and wait for them to act. I had to take control. I returned home with a plan. The first thing I did was go through my security footage again. I needed to make sure there were no gaps, no moments that could be twisted or manipulated. As I watched the footage from that day, something caught my eye. A car. It was parked right in front of my house during the time Karen claimed Charlie had attacked her. The car wasn't mine. It wasn't anyone I recognized. But there it was, in plain sight, visible in the corner of the camera's view. It was a small detail, but it was enough to raise suspicion. I didn't hesitate. I downloaded the footage and sent it straight to my lawyer. This was the evidence I needed to prove Karen was lying about the supposed new footage. She had no footage at all. It was all fabricated. And now, I had proof to back it up. But Karen wasn't backing down. That same afternoon, I saw her standing at the end of my driveway, talking to someone. I recognized the man as a private investigator, someone she had hired to gather information on me, to keep the pressure on. She wasn't just lying anymore, she was actively working with others to make sure I couldn't escape the mess she had created. The anger bubbled up inside me. This had gone too far. She was crossing a line, and I wasn't about to let her continue to drag me through the mud. I wasn't just going to sit back and wait for Karen to make her next move. I had the video, the proof, and now I had the private investigator to add to the list of people who were actively helping her ruin my life. I called my lawyer, once again, to prepare for what was about to come. It was time for the truth to come out. I wasn't going to be a victim of Karen's lies anymore. The days that followed were a whirlwind of phone calls, legal letters, and constant anxiety. Every time I left my house, it felt like I was being watched. The private investigator that Karen had hired was a constant presence, always lurking in the background, making sure I knew she was still keeping tabs on me. The tension in the neighborhood was palpable. People had stopped speaking to me altogether, and I couldn't help but feel like an outcast. I had become the villain in my own story, despite knowing that I had done nothing wrong. I had tried to remain calm, to stay composed, but every day it was harder to keep it together. The weight of Karen's accusations was wearing me down. I wasn't just fighting her anymore, I was fighting the entire neighborhood, it seemed. The whispers behind my back, the sideways glances, the constant feeling that people were judging me, it all took a toll. But even with everything piling up against me, there was still a glimmer of hope. I knew that the truth was on my side, and I wasn't going to let Karen's lies destroy everything I had worked for. My lawyer had sent a cease and desist letter to Karen's lawyer, demanding that they stop making false accusations. It felt like a small victory, but I wasn't naive enough to think it would stop Karen. She had a way of twisting things to make herself the victim, and I had no doubt that she would try to escalate things further. Still, the letter was a step in the right direction. The footage I had, of her staging the whole thing, was irrefutable. And with the new evidence of the mysterious car on the security footage, I was starting to feel like I had the upper hand, but Karen wasn't backing down. I knew this would drag on for months, if not longer. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this wasn't just about a dog bite. This was a battle for my reputation, my peace of mind, and my life. She had gone too far this time. I had reached my breaking point, and I knew it was time to take the fight to the next level. It wasn't enough to just prove that she was lying. I needed to make sure she couldn't continue her campaign of harassment. I wasn't going to let her get away with this. I started making plans, preparing for the possibility that this would eventually go to court. My lawyer advised me to gather all the evidence I could, emails, texts, and any other communication that would show how far Karen was willing to go to ruin my life. The more I compiled, the clearer it became that Karen was not the innocent victim she was pretending to be. She was a master manipulator, using her charm to get people to side with her while hiding her true intentions. Then came the tipping point. One evening, as I sat in my living room reviewing more documents, I noticed something strange outside my window. The private investigator was back, standing across the street, holding a camera. I knew it was him by the way he was standing, so stiff and focused on my house, as if waiting for something to happen. My blood boiled. This was it, this was the moment I had been waiting for. I grabbed my phone and quickly began recording. If he was going to spy on me, then I was going to make sure there was a record of it. The investigator didn't notice at first, too absorbed in his task. But then he turned his head, catching sight of me standing by the window. His eyes widened for a brief second before he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. I had it. The perfect evidence. I had caught him in the act, spying on me for Karen, attempting to intimidate me into submission. I sent the video straight to my lawyer. This was the final piece of the puzzle. I now had a clear record of Karen's tactics, how she had tried to manipulate the system, how she had gone to great lengths to make sure her false accusations didn't go unnoticed. It wasn't just about a dog bite anymore, it was about everything she had done to tear my life apart. And this evidence would be the key to ending it once and for all. A few days later, my lawyer called with news that would change everything. "We've got her," he said, his voice almost triumphant. "Her lawyer contacted us, and it seems like they've realized they don't have a case. The footage you sent us, along with the investigators' actions, are enough to prove that Karen was fabricating the entire story. They're backing down." Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with bitterness. I had been dragged through this nightmare for so long that the thought of it finally being over felt surreal. Karen had been exposed, and there was nothing she could do to hide the truth anymore. But it wasn't just about winning. It was about reclaiming my peace of mind, my life, and my reputation. For weeks, I had been in a constant state of fear, never knowing when the next blow would come, when the next accusation would be thrown my way. But now, the nightmare was finally coming to an end. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as I hung up the phone. Karen had lost. And I had won. The neighborhood slowly started to return to normal. People began speaking to me again, albeit with a bit more caution than before. I couldn't blame them. They had all been caught up in Karen's web of lies, and now they had seen the truth for themselves. But I wasn't interested in making amends. I wasn't interested in being friends with people who had turned their backs on me so quickly. I had been through too much to just forget. And Karen? She had disappeared from the neighborhood, the one who had caused all the chaos now reduced to nothing more than a memory. Charlie and I went back to our routine. The walks, the lazy afternoons, the simple joys of having a dog that wasn't a villain in anyone's story. I couldn't forget what had happened, but I was finally free from the shadow of Karen's lies. It was over. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe easy again. Then came the tipping point. One evening, as I sat in my living room reviewing more documents, I noticed something strange outside my window. The private investigator was back, standing across the street, holding a camera. I knew it was him by the way he was standing, so stiff and focused on my house, as if waiting for something to happen. My blood boiled. This was it, this was the moment I had been waiting for. I grabbed my phone and quickly began recording. If he was going to spy on me, then I was going to make sure there was a record of it. The investigator didn't notice at first, too absorbed in his task. But then he turned his head, catching sight of me standing by the window. His eyes widened for a brief second before he turned and walked away, disappearing around the corner. I had it. The perfect evidence. I had caught him in the act, spying on me for Karen, attempting to intimidate me into submission. I sent the video straight to my lawyer. This was the final piece of the puzzle. I now had a clear record of Karen's tactics, how she had tried to manipulate the system, how she had gone to great lengths to make sure her false accusations didn't go unnoticed. It wasn't just about a dog bite anymore, it was about everything she had done to tear my life apart. And this evidence would be the key to ending it once and for all. A few days later, my lawyer called with news that would change everything. "We've got her," he said, his voice almost triumphant. "Her lawyer contacted us, and it seems like they've realized they don't have a case. The footage you sent us, along with the investigators' actions, are enough to prove that Karen was fabricating the entire story. They're backing down." Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with bitterness. I had been dragged through this nightmare for so long that the thought of it finally being over felt surreal. Karen had been exposed, and there was nothing she could do to hide the truth anymore. But it wasn't just about winning. It was about reclaiming my peace of mind, my life, and my reputation. For weeks, I had been in a constant state of fear, never knowing when the next blow would come, when the next accusation would be thrown my way. But now, the nightmare was finally coming to an end. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction as I hung up the phone. Karen had lost. And I had won. The neighborhood slowly started to return to normal. People began speaking to me again, albeit with a bit more caution than before. I couldn't blame them. They had all been caught up in Karen's web of lies, and now they had seen the truth for themselves. But I wasn't interested in making amends. I wasn't interested in being friends with people who had turned their backs on me so quickly. I had been through too much to just forget. And Karen? She had disappeared from the neighborhood, the one who had caused all the chaos now reduced to nothing more than a memory. Charlie and I went back to our routine. The walks, the lazy afternoons, the simple joys of having a dog that wasn't a villain in anyone's story. I couldn't forget what had happened, but I was finally free from the shadow of Karen's lies. It was over. And for the first time in a long time, I could breathe easy again.